The sound of battle echoed through the twisted metal corridors of the dying space station. Sparks flew from shattered control panels, and the air tasted of smoke and fear. In the command center, Admiral Sarah Chen pressed her back against the cold wall, her breathing sharp and controlled. Blood trickled from a cut above her left eye, but her grip on her plasma rifle never wavered. "Status report," she whispered into her comm device. Static crackled back. Then the voice of Lieutenant Rodriguez, barely audible through the interference. "Deck 7 is lost, Admiral. They're coming up through the main shaft. Maybe 10 minutes before they reach you." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. 10 minutes. That was all that stood between humanity's last fortress and complete annihilation. Around her, the few remaining defenders checked their weapons with grim determination. These weren't the fresh-faced recruits she'd trained years ago. These were survivors, hardened by 3 years of interstellar war against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. The Zephyrian Empire had swept across the galaxy like a plague of locusts, consuming entire star systems. Their technology was superior, their numbers overwhelming, and their cruelty legendary. World after world had fallen to their biomechanical armies, leaving only whispers and ghost signals in their wake. But the Zephyrians had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated humanity. A deep rumble shook the station, and Sarah knew they were running out of time. She activated the emergency beacon one last time, broadcasting on all frequencies. Her voice, steady despite the chaos around her, carried a message that would echo across the stars. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We are humanity's final stand at Outpost Omega. To any human vessels receiving this transmission, remember us. Remember that we fought. Remember that we never surrendered. And if you encounter the Zephyrian Queen..." She paused, hefting her rifle. "Tell her that humans don't just die quietly." The transmission cut to static as another explosion rocked the station. Meanwhile, thousands of light-years away, aboard the massive flagship of the Zephyrian fleet, Queen Vexara received the intercepted message. Her 4 eyes, each the color of molten silver, showed no emotion as she listened to the human's final words. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with chitinous armor that seemed to grow from her very bones, she was a figure that inspired terror across 100 conquered worlds. "Another insignificant species making noise before extinction," she said to her war council, her voice like grinding metal. "These humans amuse me with their primitive bravado." General Thokran, her chief military advisor, bowed his massive head. "Your Majesty, our forward scouts report that this Admiral Chen has been troublesome. She destroyed 3 of our battle cruisers at the Centauri engagement." Queen Vexara's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "One lucky victory does not make legends, General. These humans are soft, short-lived creatures. Their technology is crude, their tactics predictable. They speak of warriors, but I have seen no evidence of anything more than desperate animals fighting for survival." She turned to the massive view screen showing star charts of the galaxy. Red dots marked conquered territories, an overwhelming majority of the map. Only a few scattered blue points remained, representing the last pockets of human resistance. "Deploy the harvester fleets to these remaining systems," she commanded, her clawed finger tracing across the display. "I want this human problem resolved within 1 solar cycle. Then we can focus on more worthy conquests." The War Council murmured their agreement, but deep in the ship's intelligence archives, an ancient AI cataloged every piece of intercepted human communication. Patterns were emerging, patterns that suggested the Queen might be making a fatal miscalculation. Back on Outpost Omega, Admiral Chen and her team prepared for their final battle. The station's defenders had been whittled down to just 23 souls, but they held the most fortified position in known space. More importantly, they held something the Zephyrians couldn't understand: hope. "Admiral," called out Sergeant Martinez from his position at the blast doors. "Motion sensors are picking up movement. They're here." Sarah nodded, checking her weapon one last time. Around her, men and women from a dozen different worlds stood ready to face an enemy that had crushed entire civilizations. But there was something in their eyes, Not the glazed look of the defeated, but the cold fire of those who had chosen their ground to make their stand. "Remember your training," Sarah called out as the blast doors began to glow cherry red under enemy fire. "Remember why we're here, and remember—" The doors exploded inward in a shower of molten metal and smoke. Through the breach poured the nightmare forms of Zephyrian shock troops, creatures of living metal and organic horror that had terrorized the galaxy for decades. But instead of screams of terror, the Zephyrians were met with something they had never encountered before. Humans who fought like devils, turning every corridor into a killing field, every room into a fortress. The battle that followed would be remembered by both sides for very different reasons. Chapter 2. The Impossible Victory. The first wave of Zephyrian shock troops surged through the breach like a tide of living nightmares. Each creature stood 7 feet tall, their bodies a horrifying fusion of organic tissue and mechanical augmentation. Razor-sharp appendages whistled through the air, while plasma cannons charged from ports in their chests. Admiral Chen's plasma rifle barked 3 times in rapid succession. The lead Zephyrian stumbled, its chest armor cracking, but didn't fall. These weren't the conscripted alien soldiers they'd faced before. These were the elite, the ones that had shattered the defenses of entire star systems. "Contact left," Sergeant Martinez called out, his heavy pulse cannon sending streams of coherent energy into the advancing horde. But for every Zephyrian that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. The defenders of Outpost Omega should have been overwhelmed in minutes. By every military calculation, by every tactical analysis, they were already dead. The Zephyrians had superior numbers, superior technology, and superior firepower. But calculations hadn't accounted for Staff Sergeant Kim Nakamura. Kim had been born on Europa, raised in the ice mines where one mistake meant death in the vacuum. She'd learned to fight with tools and desperation long before she'd ever held a military weapon. Now, as Zephyrian shock troops advanced down the main corridor, she did something that defied all tactical doctrine. She charged. Not the desperate rush of a cornered animal, but the calculated advance of a predator. Her combat knife found the gap between 2 armor plates on the first Zephyrian, and she rode the creature down as it collapsed, using its body as cover while she pivoted to engage the next target. The sight of a human, a small, apparently fragile human, cutting through their ranks like a force of nature sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian formation. They had conquered species with natural armor, with deadly toxins, with psychic abilities, but they had never faced anything quite like human adaptability. "Impossible," General Thakran muttered aboard the flagship, watching the battle feed from his tactical display. "They should be dead. Their weapons are inferior, their armor is primitive." Queen Vexara leaned forward in her throne, all 4 eyes focused on the display. She watched as Admiral Chen coordinated her defenders with precision that spoke of years of desperate experience. Every movement was economical, every shot placed with surgical accuracy. But it was more than just skill. These humans were fighting with something the Zephyrians had seen drain away from every other species they'd conquered: unbreakable will. "Your Majesty," one of her technicians reported, "the humans are using our own technology against us. They've somehow reversed the polarity on our plasma barriers and are using them as weapons." On the screen, they watched as Lieutenant Rodriguez jury-rigged a captured Zephyrian energy shield into an improvised explosive device. The blast took out an entire squad of advancing troops and sealed off one of the approach corridors. "Resourceful," the Queen admitted, though her tone remained dismissive. "But resourcefulness cannot overcome raw power. Send in the Phase 2 units." The Phase 2 units were Zephyrian war machines the size of shuttlecraft, bristling with weapons that could level city blocks. Their deployment against such a small target was massive overkill, but Queen Vexara wanted to make a statement. Back on the station, Admiral Chen felt the entire structure shake as something massive docked with their outer hull. Warning lights bathed everything in hellish red, and the screech of tearing metal echoed through the corridors. "Admiral!" Martinez's voice cracked with strain. "Whatever's coming through the cargo bay, it's big." Sarah closed her eyes, running quick calculations. They'd held out for almost 6 hours. far longer than anyone had expected. They'd bloodied the Zephyrian nose and proven that humans wouldn't go quietly into extinction. But now, all units, fall back to the core chamber, she ordered. Initiate Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was something they'd hoped never to use. It would turn the station's power core into a bomb capable of taking out everything within a 50-kilometer radius. It would be their final statement, their last act of defiance. But as they retreated through the winding corridors, something unexpected happened. The few remaining civilians on the station, engineers, medical staff, even some children, emerged from their hiding places, not to evacuate, but to fight. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief medical officer, appeared with a group of technicians carrying improvised weapons. "Admiral," she said calmly, "we've been monitoring the situation. You need every hand you can get." "Elena, get back to the shelters," Sarah ordered. "This isn't your fight." "With respect, Admiral," Dr. Vasquez replied, hefting a modified medical laser. "It became our fight the moment they decided we were expendable." What followed defied every prediction, every tactical model the Zephyrians had developed. The humans didn't just fight, they improvised, adapted, and overcame obstacles that should have been insurmountable. Medical equipment became weapons, maintenance tools became shields, and every corridor became a carefully orchestrated killing ground. Queen Vexara watched in growing amazement as her Phase 2 units were systematically disabled by humans, using nothing more than ingenuity and absolutely ruthless tactical thinking. She had conquered species with technology that could manipulate gravity, with biological weapons that could dissolve starship hulls, with psychic powers that could crush minds from across star systems. But she had never seen anything quite like human creativity under pressure. "General," she said slowly, "how many casualties have we sustained taking this single station?" General Thokran checked his tactical display, and his expression grew troubled. "Your Majesty, we've lost approximately 60% of the assault force, including 3 Phase 2 units, 60%, against fewer than 30 humans defending a single space station. For the first time in her reign, Queen Vexara felt something she hadn't experienced in centuries: doubt." Chapter 3. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The silence that followed the last explosion was deafening. Admiral Chen crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been the station's main computer core, her rifle trained on the smoke-filled corridor ahead. Around her, the survivors of humanity's last stand waited in positions they'd never expected to hold. They were still alive. Somehow, impossibly, they had not only survived the Zephyrian assault, but had actually driven them back. The corridor ahead was littered with the metallic corpses of creatures that had conquered worlds, brought low by humans who had refused to accept the inevitable. "Status report," Sarah whispered into her comm. "Perimeter secure," came Martinez's voice, tinged with exhaustion and disbelief. "No movement on any sensor grid. I think they're regrouping." Dr. Vasquez crawled up beside the Admiral, her improvised medical laser still clutched in her hands. Her usually pristine lab coat was torn and stained, but her eyes held the same determined fire that had burned in Sarah's for 3 years of desperate warfare. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the Zephyrian remains," she said quietly. "Their technology, it's not as advanced as we thought, it's just different, and they've never had to adapt it for defensive warfare." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" "They've been the aggressors for so long that their entire tactical doctrine is based on overwhelming offense. Look at their armor." She gestured toward a fallen Zephyrian warrior. "It's designed to protect against energy weapons firing from the front. But Kim's knife attacks from the side and rear were devastatingly effective because they never expected to face an enemy that would get close enough to use melee weapons." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Zephyrians weren't invincible. They were just supremely specialized for conquest against enemies who fought the way they expected them to fight. But humans didn't fight fair. Aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Queen Vexara paced the length of her command chamber, her clawed feet clicking against the biomechanical deck plating. The tactical displays around her showed something that challenged every assumption she'd held about warfare, about conquest, about the natural order of the universe. A single human outpost had cost her more casualties than the conquest of the Andorian homeworld. Your Majesty, General Thokran approached cautiously. The assault commanders are requesting permission to withdraw and regroup. They suggest a tactical bombardment from orbit might be more efficient. Vexara's 4 eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made the general's exoskeleton crack under the pressure. Withdraw? From a single space station defended by primitives? Your Majesty, these humans, they fight unlike any species we have encountered. Our predictive combat algorithms cannot compensate for their tactical unpredictability. They use their own weaknesses as weapons, turn our strengths against us, and seem to possess an unlimited capacity for adaptation under pressure. The Queen's mandibles clicked in irritation. For 3 centuries, the Zephyrian Empire had conquered through a simple formula: overwhelming technological superiority, backed by numbers that could afford to absorb casualties. They had never needed to adapt because no enemy had ever forced them to. "Show me the battle recordings again," she commanded. The holographic displays came alive with images from the assault. Vexara watched with growing fascination as a human barely half her size, Staff Sergeant Nakamura, single-handedly disabled a Phase 2 unit by somehow reversing its own power systems against it. The creature had literally torn itself apart, while the human calmly moved on to the next target. "How?" the Queen whispered. "How does a species this fragile develop such capacity for warfare?" Her chief science advisor, a spindly creature called Kethara, consulted his databanks. "Your Majesty, preliminary analysis of human history suggests they are the only known species to achieve interstellar capability, while simultaneously maintaining active warfare among their own kind. They have been fighting continuously for their entire evolutionary history." "Fighting each other?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Unlike every other spacefaring civilization we have encountered, humans achieved technological advancement not in spite of conflict, but because of it. They are literally evolved for warfare." Queen Vexara stared at the tactical displays with new understanding. Every other species the Zephyrians had conquered had been peaceful, unified civilizations that had achieved technology through cooperation and mutual development. They had been sheep, essentially. Advanced sheep, but sheep nonetheless. Humans were wolves. "Your Majesty," General Thokran interrupted her thoughts. "We are receiving another transmission from the station." Admiral Chen's image appeared on the main screen, and for the first time Queen Vexara truly looked at her opponent. The human was smaller than any Zephyrian warrior, covered in primitive fabric and organic materials rather than advanced armor. She was bleeding from multiple wounds. Her equipment was clearly inferior, and she should have been dead hours ago. But her eyes held something that made the Queen's chitin crawl. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen," the human said calmly. "I believe we need to talk." "You address the Queen of the Zephyrian Empire, primitive," General Thokran snarled. "Surrender now, and your death will be swift." Sarah's expression didn't change. "I wasn't talking to you, General. I was talking to your Queen. And I think she's smart enough to realize that this conversation is in both our interests." Queen Vexara raised a claw, silencing her general. For a long moment she studied the human on the screen. Then slowly, she leaned forward. "Speak, Admiral Chen. You have earned the right to be heard. Your intelligence reports tell you that this station represents humanity's last significant military installation," Sarah began. "What they don't tell you is why we chose to make our stand here rather than evacuate to the outer systems." She paused, and something in her smile made the Queen's 4 eyes narrow with suspicion. "We didn't choose to die here, Your Majesty. We chose to make you work for it. Every hour you've spent taking this station, every casualty you've absorbed, every resource you've committed, it's been buying time for the rest of humanity to prepare." The Queen's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Prepare for what?" "To learn from our mistakes, to study your tactics, to adapt." Sarah's smile grew wider. "You see, Your Majesty, You made the same error that every species makes about humans. You assumed that because we're primitive, we're stupid. But we're the species that learned to fly by watching birds, learned to swim by watching fish, and learned to fight by fighting each other for 10,000 years. She leaned closer to the camera. And now we've learned to hunt by watching you. Before Queen Vexara could respond, alarms began blaring throughout her flagship. Her tactical officer's voice cut through the noise with panic-edged urgency. Your Majesty, we have multiple hyperspace signatures emerging throughout the system. Unknown vessels, configuration unlike anything in our databases. On the main screen, space around the Zephyrian fleet began to fill with ships that seemed to have been cobbled together from scrap metal and determination. They were ugly, asymmetrical, and clearly built by different hands using whatever materials were available. But they moved with the coordinated precision of a pack hunt. Allow me to introduce you, Admiral Chen said from her screen, to the human resistance fleet. We've been very busy while you were learning how hard it is to kill us. Queen Vexara's 4 eyes went wide as she realized the trap that had been laid for her. The station hadn't been humanity's last stand. It had been bait. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. The space around Zephyron Prime's outer system transformed into a battlefield unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Hundreds of human vessels, each one unique, scarred, and clearly built from salvaged materials, emerged from hyperspace in perfect coordination. They looked like a fleet of pirates and rebels, which, in many ways, they were. But they fought like demons. Queen Vexara watched from her flagship's command throne as her perfectly ordered battle formations met something entirely unprecedented: organized chaos. The human ships didn't follow standard naval doctrine. They didn't maintain formation integrity or fire in coordinated volleys. Instead, they swarmed like insects, each vessel adapting its tactics moment by moment to exploit whatever weakness they could find. Your Majesty. General Thokran's voice cracked with strain. The 7th Battle Group reports 30% casualties. The humans are using some kind of gravitational weapon we've never encountered before. On the tactical display, Vexara watched as a battered human destroyer somehow caused 3 of her heavy cruisers to collide with each other at sublight speed. The weapon wasn't gravitational. It was tactical brilliance combined with what appeared to be modified mining equipment. How are they doing this? She demanded. Her science advisor, Kethara, consulted his data streams with growing amazement. Your Majesty, they appear to be using every piece of technology they've ever encountered, including our own. That destroyer just fired modified Andronian plasma torpedoes using Zephyrian targeting systems, powered by what appears to be a human fusion reactor. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos on the comm channels. All units, Pattern 7. Remember, they're strongest head-on, weakest when they're trying to maneuver. Pack hunters, people. Pack hunters. Vexara watched as the human fleet split into dozens of smaller groups, each one attacking from a different angle, forcing her ships to constantly rotate and adjust their defensive positions. Every time her forces tried to concentrate their firepower, the humans would scatter, regroup, and attack from an entirely different vector. It was like trying to fight smoke. Your Majesty, her communications officer reported, we're receiving transmission requests from 17 different human commanders. They all want to talk. Ignore them, the Queen snarled. Focus fire on their command ship, kill their admiral, and the rest will fall apart. But identifying the human command ship proved impossible. Every human vessel seemed to operate independently while somehow maintaining perfect coordination. When her forces concentrated fire on what appeared to be the flagship, it would fade back while 3 others pressed the attack. Aboard the human ship, Lucky Strike, a vessel that had started life as a cargo hauler and been transformed into something between a battleship and a fortress, Admiral Chen coordinated the battle with grim satisfaction. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the smooth efficiency of people who had learned their trade in the hardest school imaginable. Survival, Admiral, called out Lieutenant Rodriguez from the tactical station. Zephyrian Formation 7 is breaking. Captain Morrison's group has them in a crossfire. Tell Morrison to press the advantage, but don't get cocky, Sarah replied. These aren't the same troops we faced at the station. They're adapting. And they were. Even as she watched, the Zephyrian fleet began to modify its tactics, trying to counter the human pack-hunting approach. But they were thinking like Zephyrians, looking for the pattern, the system, the logical approach they could counter with superior technology. They didn't understand that chaos was the pattern. All ships, Sarah broadcast. Time for Operation Wildcard. You know what to do. Across the human fleet, vessels that had been fighting in coordinated groups suddenly broke apart and began operating on individual initiative. No central command, no overall strategy, just hundreds of independent captains who had learned to fight like pirates and had been given permission to do exactly that. Queen Vexara watched her ordered universe descend into madness. Every tactical algorithm, every strategic model, every lesson learned from 3 centuries of conquest became useless as the humans abandoned any pretense of conventional warfare. A human corvette, badly damaged and venting atmosphere, somehow managed to ram one of her dreadnoughts and detonate its reactor core in the impact. The explosion took out 2 other Zephyrian ships and left a 4th crippled. A jury-rigged human freighter deployed what appeared to be a cloud of metallic debris, which turned out to be thousands of tiny guided missiles, each one programmed to target a different system on Zephyrian vessels. Most incredibly, a single human fighter craft, little more than an engine with weapons strapped to it, managed to penetrate the defensive screen around her flagship and deliver a message directly to her personal communications array. The pilot's voice, calm and almost conversational, filled her command chamber. Your Majesty, this is Captain Jack Morrison of the Terran vessel Revenge. I wanted you to know that my ship is currently attached to your hull, approximately 50 meters below your throne room. My fusion bomb has a 30-second timer which started, about 20 seconds ago. You might want to move. The explosion that followed didn't destroy the flagship, but it sent shockwaves through the massive vessel that cracked support struts and knocked several key systems offline. More importantly, it sent a message that penetrated even Queen Vexara's supreme arrogance. Nowhere was safe from human determination. Your Majesty, General Thokron approached with obvious reluctance. Our casualties are approaching critical levels. We've lost 40% of the fleet and the humans show no signs of wavering. I recommend strategic withdrawal. For a moment, the command chamber fell silent except for the sounds of distant battle. Queen Vexara stared at the tactical displays, watching her supposedly invincible fleet being systematically dismantled by creatures she had dismissed as primitive animals. No, she said quietly. Then louder. No, I am Queen Vexara of the Zephyrian Empire. I have conquered 100 worlds, crushed 1,000 civilizations. I will not be defeated by... Her words were cut off as Admiral Chen's image appeared on every screen in the command chamber. The human looked tired, bloodied, but far from defeated. Your Majesty, Sarah said calmly, I believe it's time for that conversation. Epilogue. The Price of Legends. The meeting took place aboard Outpost Omega, in the same command center where Admiral Chen had made her final stand just days earlier. The wall still bore scorch marks from plasma fire, and the deck plating was buckled in places where Zephyrian shock troops had fought and died. Queen Vexara stood in the center of the chamber, her 8-foot frame somehow diminished by the simple human furniture around her. For the first time in her centuries of existence, she was not the most dangerous thing in the room. Admiral Chen sat across from her, still wearing her battered uniform, still carrying the scars of their first encounter. But her eyes held the confidence of someone who had looked into the abyss and discovered that the abyss blinked first. Your Majesty, Sarah began, let's discuss terms. Terms? Vexara's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter. I am still Queen of the Zephyrian Empire. My fleets still outnumber yours 100 to 1. Your fleets, Sarah replied calmly, are currently spread across half the galaxy, trying to hold on to conquests that are now in open rebellion. Word travels fast, Your Majesty. When the universe learns that humans drove off the supposedly invincible Zephyrian Empire, every species you've ever conquered is going to remember what freedom tastes like. Through the station's viewing ports, the two leaders could see the aftermath of the battle. Zephyrian ships hung dead in space, their hulls cracked and broken. Human vessels, scarred but victorious, moved among them like sharks among the wreckage. "What do you want?" Vexara asked finally. "Withdrawal from all human-controlled systems, reparations for the worlds you've destroyed, and recognition of human space as off-limits to Zephyrian expansion." "And in return?" Sarah leaned back in her chair. "In return, we don't teach the rest of the galaxy how to fight the way we fight. You get to keep your empire, Your Majesty, what's left of it." For a long moment, the two leaders studied each other. Finally, Queen Vexara spoke. "You knew, didn't you? From the beginning, you knew this was never about holding a single station." "The station was never the point," Sarah confirmed. "The point was making you think like hunters instead of conquerors, making you commit resources to a target that would teach us everything we needed to know about how you fight, making you underestimate us just long enough for us to learn how to hurt you." "And if I refuse your terms?" Sarah's smile was cold as the void between stars. "Then we continue this conversation across every world in your empire. And Your Majesty, we're very good at having long conversations." Queen Vexara looked around, the battle-scarred command center, at the humans who had somehow turned certain defeat into impossible victory, at the species that had never learned to accept the word surrender. "You would have made excellent Zephyrians," she said finally. "No, Your Majesty," Admiral Chen replied. "We wouldn't, because Zephyrians conquer through strength. Humans survive through adaptation. And the thing about adaptation is, there's no limit to how far it can go." She stood, extending her hand in the ancient human gesture of agreement. "The question is, are you ready to learn what comes after conquest?" "Queen." Vexara stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Then slowly, she reached out with one clawed appendage and grasped it. The handshake between the alien queen and the human admiral lasted only seconds, but it echoed across the galaxy like a thunderclap. The age of Zephyrian conquest was over. The age of human legend had begun. In the years that followed, the story would be told and retold across 1,000 worlds. How humanity's last stand had become its first victory. How Admiral Sarah Chen had faced down the queen of the most feared empire in the galaxy and forced her to blink first. But the humans who lived through it knew the truth. They hadn't won through superior strength or advanced technology. They had won by being exactly what they had always been. Survivors who refused to quit, innovators who turned disadvantages into advantages, and warriors who understood that sometimes the best weapon is the enemy's assumption that you can't possibly win. Queen Vexara had dismissed human warriors as legends until she stood before one. By then it was too late to learn that sometimes legends are born not from what people can do, but from what they refuse to stop trying to do. The stars themselves had learned a new lesson. Never underestimate a species that has spent its entire existence proving that the impossible is just another word for not yet. And in the quiet corridors of Outpost Omega, where scorch marks still decorated the walls and the air still tasted faintly of victory and desperation, Admiral Sarah Chen prepared for the next impossible thing humanity would be called upon to accomplish. Because in a universe full of predators, the most dangerous creature of all is the one that everyone thinks is prey, right up until the moment it shows its teeth. End of story.